Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. Back by popular demand, Dr. Tony Boutagy. Your last episode was extremely popular, so it's great to see you again. Thanks for coming on.
So great to be here. Thank you.
And if anybody listening, this is the first time you're getting to hear Tony, well, you're a PhD of exercise and sports science. Gives you a lot of credibility in this space, and you can always go back to the previous episode, which was really popular. So let's dive right into it. Do men and women build muscle differently?
The short answer is no, not really. And the question everyone wants to know is, well, if we do, should we have a different program, do a different rep scheme, use a different set number? And I think for decades, women have been, by and large, generally afraid of bulking up and looking like a bodybuilder in the off season. And therefore, they've designed their weight training to put on the least amount of muscle possible. But I think we're now in an age where muscular is good and females are happy to grow muscle, especially in specific areas like glutes, like shoulders, like abs. Maybe not as all round as males by and large, but women are really embracing the resistance train. And I think that's a great thing. So to answer your question, do males and females essentially grow at the same magnitude or same rate? Well, there's two things we need to tease out. What is the difference in absolute changes? Everyone knows the answer to that. Males can grow absolutely more than females can. But what is the relative change, knowing that one might be starting here and the other starting up here after puberty? Well, the relative changes, surprisingly, I was surprised by this, are actually pretty similar. And there is now a number of meta-analyses that have looked at this from the perspective of age and training status. And essentially, the magnitudes are really similar given the relative change rather than the absolute change. So we just have to rule out that difference there.
And on average, because this is the phrase that matters the most, women start off smaller with less muscle mass, smaller upper body frames for certain. And like you said, with the absolutes, the largest, most muscular humans in the world will be men. There are women, lots of women that will have more muscle and can build more muscle than a lot of men. This is just an on average phenomenon, correct?
Absolutely. And we must not forget that there are huge individual differences, not just sex differences. And I think this is often forgotten as well. Anyone who's done research on this and has looked at the distribution of results across an 8, 10, or 12-week study looking at muscle growth knows there's some who gain very little, and there's some outliers who we really want to know what they're doing and how they could grow so much. But when you look at the female data as well, there are just the same differences. And that is really encouraging because there's no two people that are the same, not just the sex. That is, we're looking at the person in front of us when we write a program and trying to problem solve. Are you growing to the magnitude you want to grow, whether you are a male or female? And the fun question for people like me who are coaches is if you are a hard gainer and you really want to grow your glutes or your shoulders and you're struggling, well, you're not alone. Men are in the same basket as well. Some men are, some men aren't, some women are, some women aren't. So how can we change the variables to get the most out of your genetics?
Here's another thing I think is worth diving into. We know that uh, men, when they go through puberty, they're exposed to a lot more testosterone. And that is the explanation as to why they have more muscle mass on average in larger frames. But we've long said to women who are fearful of putting on too much muscle, we've said this, like, well, you don't have as much testosterone as a man, therefore you couldn't get as muscular as a man. But that's actually not true, is it?
No, the first pertains to the growth status when during the pubertal years you are laying down your muscle tissue. And boys and teenagers are exposed to huge elevations in testosterone 24/7. The different question is, well, once you've reached puberty and you are now in adulthood, then the hormonal environments between males and females are different in that respect. And there's been a lot of argument that, and for many years, research actually looked at this as a very viable avenue, that when you lift weights, the hormones that are responsible for laying down new tissue, increasing muscle protein synthesis, they spike and then they go back down to normal. And there are differences between males and females in that respect. You could take a step back and say there's actually vast differences in biology in the exercise response between males and females. But that's not the same thing as saying if you are given the same program, will you respond differently because of those differences? And the answer is males and females tend to respond very similarly, despite differences in underlying hormones or muscle fiber differences, or even fatigue resistance. You would think, based on the data, that females could do more work because they have got greater durability, they've got greater fatigue resistance. But that's just not borne out in the head-to-head studies that give males and females the same work, and also give studies where the rest interval is shortened. So we should see a clear advantage from being a female, and we don't see that.
Right. Something I think relates to this, and you can correct me if I'm on the wrong track here, but we also have thought that if we can increase our natural testosterone, this is on the men's side, that we would see better muscle gain, but we don't. And for sure, in men and women, if you like take in exogenous testosterone and you get into super normal amounts of circulating testosterone because it's, synthetic, then we absolutely see an anabolic response. It's a very potent anabolic trigger, but within normal physiological ranges, it doesn't seem to affect muscle growth. Is that kind of part of the argument as to why men and women grow equally well relative to their starting point?
Exactly. There essentially are three ranges that's really instructive to understand this whole concept. There is hypogonadal, and then there is a normal range of testosterone, and then there's supraphysiological. It's very clear that when you have supraphysiological levels of androgens due to injecting them, then you will lay down more muscle tissue and it prevents muscle protein breakdown. So you're always anabolic. Then there's this huge range of having normal testosterone levels, and then there is clinically low testosterone. Between males and females who sit in the normal physiological range for both sexes, it is really clear that the driver of growing new tissue starts and almost ends with placing enough tension on the muscle cell that you are trying to grow. And the muscle is agnostic, whether that is a male muscle or a female muscle. It just knows tension on the muscle. And this has really come about through the labs of Troy Hornenberger and Mike Roberts, who've been at the forefront of developing techniques for looking at fiber tension and trying to rule out, well, what are some of the other candidates which have always thought to have been involved? We've just talked about hormones, but we've talked about muscle damage in the past. We've talked about metabolic acidosis and lactate. These are all candidates that coaches like me, who've been around decades, have designed explicitly in our programs to elicit the most damage, to create the most metabolic flux, to make a client feel green, uh, and as much fatigue as possible. These are all things that are associated with muscle growth. But Roberts and Hornberger are essentially saying they're there, but really it is tension that's placed on the muscle, i.e., working with high loads, working with high effort at lighter loads, because there's a number of different ways that you can place tension on the muscle. And the hormones, although present and accompanying this mechanical tension, are not driving it per se.
That makes a lot of sense. I want to go back to something you said early, and I'll frame this as I've trained in person men and women, online men and women. I've had an online women's group strength program for quite a while. And obviously, some people market more aggressively and brand themselves around exclusively women's training. And I mean, I'm confident in saying that there doesn't need to be a difference. Now, we tend to see some self-selection on average, like you said, women seem to gravitate towards, like larger numbers, training glutes, certain other aesthetic physique muscles that will create a certain look, right? Guys tend to, on average, bias a little bit more towards pec development, arms, right? And I find one of the reasons why I might program a little bit differently for men and women. Again, it's always very individual. And like you said earlier, I find there's more inter-individual differences than there are gender-based differences here. But we see some, things play out in practice based on preferences, not physiology. Uh, And I'm actually in the works of building a men's program, which will complement the women's, and they're actually going to be pretty similar. The other reason why I would I have done the women's only program to this point is a community, right? There's a community where they can interact with each other. So those things are legit, but it doesn't mean that they actually have to have different training programs. Do you
I
agree with that?
agree. I agree. And I think that should be a really strong public message because individualizing based on one's goals is really the driver of what coaches do every day. It always starts with what do you want? Where do you want to grow? And just as importantly, what do you want to maintain? And what don't you want anything? And once we understand that structure of growth to maintenance to nothing at all, we can then design the actual session and then the frequency to get the most out of those three answers. And the idea that men generally want a well-rounded muscular physique is not always the case, but you could probably look at any program and say, I've taken the name off it. Look at this program, and you tell me who's it for. And you should be able to look at that and say, that's probably for an 18-year-old guy because there's three exercises for pecs and arms. He doesn't have anything for his legs. There's nothing for the glutes. Like that's my son's program. When I'm doing hip thrusts, he's 16 years old. He does another set of arm curls. He's not doing any more glutes. Whereas in my gym, I work in a commercial gym, I cannot get on the hip thrust. I mean, there is a queue of women waiting to get on it.
Mm.
And that is a glorious thing that we are seeing both sexes really embracing resistance training. But to your point, these are goal driven, not biology driven. And that
Mhm.
really has been made a big deal that the differences in biology, and we've mentioned a few, fiber type difference, mitochondrial difference, fatigue resistance. So you could go on and on. There are what are called sex dimorphisms in biology and physiology. And that should be acknowledged and of great interest to the physiologist. To the coach, the question we ask ourselves is how does that change how we write a program and the client's adaptation? And as it turns out, when we have more and more data accumulating every week, that we can be reassured that females haven't been, contra to influences, women haven't been force-fed programs designed for men. There seems to be great similarity in the response of men and women to the same program.
What about bone health? Is there anything important in this discussion that you'd want to say for bone health? And that's relevant to men and women, although I think the stakes are actually higher. It's more important discussion for women, especially perimenopausal, postmenopausal.
Simply start early. The earlier females embrace resistance training and bone loading through jumping and cross-country running and change of direction activities like soccer or even mixed martial arts where you're moving in different directions. These have been shown over and over to be helpful for bone. And the earlier you start, the better. And then we have non-negotiables that the resistance training programs should be done at least 2 to 3 times a week across the lifespan for women, especially through the menopausal transition, where the body's feedback system is, I don't really feel like exercising today because I feel blah for no sleep, for vasomotor symptoms, and so forth, is we need to create a community that really gets you going when you don't feel like it. And then we ensure that we've got bone covered from the nutritional perspective, from the loading perspective, and we put all of that together into support groups.
Wonderful. I know that was a bit of a quick hitter, but that covers it. I've got more of a deep dive with Dr. Lauren Colenso Semple on dispelling all of the myths and misinformation. particularly pertaining to weighted vests, walking with weighted vests. All right. This one's really pertinent right now. So on our last podcast, we went deep dive debunking a lot of false, unsupported, misleading claims made by popular influencers. And quite frankly, some of these people have PhD level, MD level credentials. This is becoming more common. There's been a few incidents of recent. And what often happens, they get on the big podcasts. The big podcasts are known for farming for clips by asking questions and directing conversation a certain way to get sensational answers, things that will play well in a viral clip that will draw attention from the masses. And well, that certainly worked. So, why does this happen? What's the underlying set of incentives to misrepresent research or outright make it up?
It's difficult to answer what somebody's motives are, and it would be impossible to speak to that.
Mm,
But the primary reason you would imagine is either fame and popularity,
mm,
because controversy generates clicks. There could be monetary incentives that the more clicks are driven to your YouTube page for saying something that's really left of field, people click on that and you get incentivized. Sometimes the personality is a contrarian and they thrive on controversy and saying the very opposite. And we have heard it through our lifetime of everything that you have heard is wrong. And here's the answer. And it doesn't matter whether it's nutrition or exercise. In our space, we just happen to hear it in exercise. But where it has really grabbed traction is that women haven't been studied, which means that women are running experiments on themselves. And everything that you have done for your exercise selection and for your nutrition has been based on men. And you, as a female, are clearly not a man, so this is inappropriate. And it sounds great, but it's just a version of everything you've ever heard is wrong, and I'm now going to sell you the answer because I'm here for you. I hear you, I see you, and this is what you need to do. And at first principles, it sounds amazing until you go and look at the claim. And this is where the public are not trained to disassociate the difference in biology and then its training outcome. And that's all we care about. Do females need to do something different for a male to improve aerobic fitness, run 5Ks faster, take carbohydrate when they're exercising, the timing that they have protein after their resistance training session? Do they need to exclusively train at the lower rep or high loads? Or could they do, you could go on and on. But influencers have made a very lucrative career by saying that everything you have heard is wrong because it's been based on men. And here is the answer. And when you look at every claim, most, not all, but most claims are either weak or unsupported.
And what I think I'm seeing now is the evidence-based community is more aggressive, more savvy. They're hunting for these
Mhm.
clips, this misinformation, and they're pouncing all over it. I mean, I'm comfortable throwing out there's Dr. Rhonda Patrick got on Mel Robbins, and there's this ridiculous clip about saying, hey, you shouldn't put blueberries and bananas in a smoothie together, which of course that got ripped apart and torn up by almost anybody who has any evidence-based background in nutrition. Whether it's just debunking the claim is not being supported by the research she's talking about was like just crazy weak. Some small study. It didn't really say what she was claiming it was, or the fact that you're dealing with just such a first world problem and majoring in the minor to the point where even if there was some substance to this, I mean, we're trying to get people to eat more fruit and eat healthier, and you're worried about this kind of nonsense, right? So it got ripped apart all over the place. And this is an individual, and again, I try not to be too disparaging here, but who has built a very large following and has a PhD. And one of my criticisms of some of the PhD tier who brand themselves as science communicators is they wander wildly all over different areas that are not their area of education or research. But this actually was hers. So it just seemed very odd.
It, again, it's really hard to understand one's motive for saying this, whether they
Mm.
truly believe it, that the antioxidant content of anything else that you put in that smoothie will be blocked by the compounds that are in bananas. and whether that will really make a difference, and whether that really is a problem in today's community that, as you've said, is really struggling to eat enough plant foods anyway, and
Mm.
putting it in a smoothie is probably the no-brainer thing to do in the morning because they're never going to eat it for the rest of the day. I just don't see this being a problem worthy of talking about publicly, because we must remember there's a difference between having a conversation with your colleagues who knows this stuff back to front versus putting it out to your millions of followers who don't know the first thing and just want to know, well, what should I have in the morning if I don't like fruits and vegetables? And the same question is what we try and answer is what goes into your resistance training program or your fitness program. If you are a female versus a male, should they be different? Because I've heard they should be different. And we should be answering those at large general level. And of course, we can go into the nitty gritty. We love that. But that should be second order question to, well, what should males and females do?
Wonderful. I think we're going to see more and more of these claims, these skeptical, sorry, problematic claims get pushed out because of the nature of those type of podcasts. And I think we're going to see more and more pushback from the evidence-based community. And I think it's not that stitching these things is unethical, because if someone is making up stuff or presenting, let's call it misinformation or being unhelpful, then it's fair game. I'm comfortable with that. And I just think now more and more people are like, all right, I'm fed up with the way social media tends to play. So I'm going to play the same game just to share better information. And my hope is that as it's being done by more and more people with larger audiences and followings, I saw James Smith do a video about it, Lane Norton, some people with really big traction. And I think that the mainstream audience is just simply going to, get exposed to what makes sense and debunk these silly things.
I hope so, because there have been a number of people who have seen misinformation being and women being targeted with this misinformation with the clear purpose of, I've got the answer for you, and essentially you've been lied to. And there gets that anger. And when you do look at the comments on posts, there is this undertone of anger of, well, this influencer, they have a PhD and they've done hundreds of research studies and they really know what they're talking about. And because of that, that as we've talked about their credentials, that just answers everyone's question of, well, they must be an authority. And then they go on all the big podcasts. And I get questions daily, but so too do my clients, and so do my best friends' wives. They come and ask, they end up coming and asking me, well, should I be doing 5 sets of 5 for my bone? Or should I be doing sprint training? And I've stopped doing my zone 2. And I know where it all comes from. And it's not good foundations. And this is the job of other academics or other high level coaches to say, well, hang on a second, that advice is not good advice. You're still allowed to say that because we've got support underlying it. And if anyone has better support to say, well, actually, females should do 5 sets of 5 and men, it doesn't matter what they do, well, show us the data. But that data doesn't exist.
A quick break from this episode to shout out RP Strength and the RP Hypertrophy app. I have a big confession. I've never used a coach before. I've always auto-regulated my training for decades. But I've known Dr. Mike Isertel and Nick Shaw, the founders of RP, for years. I'll get behind anything they create, including years of reading their books, consuming their media, attending their seminars, and having them as guests on the show. And I've been using the RP Hypertrophy app now for several months. And several things have happened. It forced me to make smaller and more gradual but better increases in weight volume across time, like putting 5-pound plates on each side of a leg press. Like, who does that? Never before. Only 45s. It cut out the junk volume. It made my workouts faster and more efficient. I show up with a plan. I didn't have to think about what to do. I feel more accountable having to log my progress. And I don't skip things because I don't feel like it. If hiring a one-on-one coach isn't for you, using the RP Hypertrophy app is the next best thing to manage your gains and to take the guesswork out of your program. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it risk-free, and if you don't like it, they'll give you your money back. And I've also got you a $50 US dollar discount, so go to rpstrength.com/coats and use the code COATSRP, or go to the link below in the show notes. That's rpstrength.com/coats and use the code COATSRP.
Just thought of this, and this makes a ton of sense. when we see someone, let's say with a PhD, who gets on, makes these claims, sometimes gets ripped apart because, it's bad science, but then people defend them and say, well, they have a PhD, they're an authority. Well, there's a self-selection problem here. The overwhelming majority of the evidence-based PhDs who know how to read and interpret research, they're not on social media in any meaningful way. They're in academia. There's definitely some bias in that world about not being on there. And even the few that do, like yourself, you probably get a little bit of pushback from the academic world as to why you're even doing it. So it's not that the people who are, I'm going to use the word grifting or approaching that. It's not that they're representative at all of the body of the academics, is they tend to be the outliers who self-select to, as you said earlier, seeking status, fame, the money, etc. And it's not to say that everybody who does it is inherently bad, but there is the argument, okay, should more of the academic community who understands how to interpret this research be present on social media? And it's not necessarily fair to put that pressure. Maybe the community might be better off not looking down upon those that choose to. But through that lens, you realize, well, maybe the person who's making the loud claims at the PhD, maybe they're the outlier. Maybe they're the one of the 3 out of 100 that disagrees with the near consensus. And that's a good way to look at it, I think.
I think so too. And universities are growing with the times and realizing that there needs to be people on the faculty who are engaged in the public communication of science.
Mm.
And this isn't everyone's skill set, but I think this is growing. We are seeing people like Stu Phillips, for example, who is publicly engaging either with a podcast of himself with Marty Gabala or in his many posts that he does. This is kind of on the university time. At least you would hope so, because it's a lot of time to spend engaging with people in addition to running a lab and chairing a department. But you're absolutely right. The community who is on social media, who is interested in this stuff, it would be nice for them to know, well, there is a body of scientists who do this work, and the general consensus moves in this direction. And of course, like a river, it weaves and changes as new data comes out, as we would expect. But there is an overwhelming viewpoint that a viewpoint on a topic, whether it's resistance training or interval training or protein feeding, the majority accept that. And when somebody makes a claim so far afield, but because they are a PhD or because they've done a STEM talk or whatever that is, they need to realize, well, that person is sitting so far out of the field that the majority think this. And that might play into your psyche and think, well, yeah, well, the establishment is wrong anyway. And I really gravitate towards that. Well, that's your preference and your viewpoint, and we would run with that. But the job of folks like me or Stu or Lane, as we've talked about, is to present what the current data is and why that's most likely to be the right answer. Because again, all the public want to know is, well, what am I doing when I turn up to the weight room today?
And it makes sense that the people who are the outliers are more likely to be platformed by or even seek out getting onto
Right.
Rogan, Mel Robbins, Diary of a CEO. And it doesn't mean, because there are people that I respect who've been on these shows, but I actually think they're in the minority compared to the usual guests that get platformed by those type of shows.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
A quick pause for a sponsor shout out. I've been working with Train Heroic for several rounds of my online programs, and I'm working on expanding what I offer through the platform. Train Heroic is easy to use, and my clients love it. And I have friends who've sunk tens of thousands of dollars in their own app while constantly worrying and hoping that it doesn't break. Using Train Heroic means no stress for me. I trust Train Heroic's long-standing reputation for quality as an industry leader, and I know their team personally, and they're quick to come to my aid when I break things. I sometimes break things. Train Heroic is also trusted by some of the industry's best coaches, including people like Joe DeFranco, Jason Brown, Vernon Griffith, Dr. Megan Sack-Akbina, Mike Boyle, and Angus Bradley. And we've updated your free trial with more support from the Train Heroic team and to set you up and help maximize the platform's potential. You start with a 30-day free trial, and once you sign up, I'll cover your second month. You get 60 days free total. Start your trial at www.trainheroic.com, and when the Train Heroic team reaches out, tell them you came from me and the Lift Free and Diet Art podcast, and they'll hook you up.
Okay, next question. Does cardio help you build muscle?
There's probably three ways of looking at that, and they're all a little bit different. The first would be if you find that your recovery between sets is limited. You start with squats, you rest 2 minutes between sets, but you notice everything else that you do in that workout is impaired because you are fatigued from that first set, then you may benefit from raising all round physical capacity, better oxygen transport, better lactate clearance. And my experience for those people who do have a large part of their programs doing quote unquote cardio training are able to recover faster between sets and have a greater work output. This hasn't been well tested in the literature, also really difficult to do that over years. But on first principles, it makes sense. Those people who recover the slowest between sets are generally those people who just do steps, for example, or do no cardio at all. So they don't have a robust cardiorespiratory system. That would be point one. And at this stage, I've seen enough proof to convince me that it is correct. The
I would
second
also,
is,
I would say anecdotally from the clientele that I work with, I mean, the most deconditioned people are the ones that need the longest time between their sets.
right.
It is worth saying that once you get into really strong people using very heavy absolute loads, there's
Mhm,
something about that that
mhm.
will demand greater recovery.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. Let's just take the women that I work with who are double body weight squatters for reps, but also do a lot of cardio. They could do the next set and the next set and the next set with under a minute rest, whereas most might need 3 minutes. And the world-class endurance athletes that I've worked with can do, say, an 8 or a 10 RM on their legs. And you help them through that last rep. And 30 seconds later, they can do the exact same thing again. And not everyone is an endurance athlete, but it just speaks to the point, which is your question, is if you build robust fitness, will it help you by and large perform more work in a training session? And my experience is yes, it is, knowing that the research base underneath that is not strong. The
Mm.
second question is biological. If you build up apparatus inside the muscle, such as capillarization, are you able to get more effective stimulus for hypertrophy? And indeed, two studies from around 10 years ago using brilliant within subject designs. One leg did weights and cardio, the other leg just did cardio in both young and old, showed that there was actually kind of like a smoking gun there. That is, those people who had more capillary response also had a greater hypertrophy response. But a recent study at Luc Van Loon's lab, published by Betts last year, actually put this to the test, and it was a between group design. So one group did 8 weeks of aerobic training as preconditioning, and then both groups did, I think it was 12 weeks of resistance training or thereabouts, and they couldn't tease out the difference. So that
Mm.
was a direct test of the capillary hypothesis. It, it needs more work. It does make sense from the biology of it that the capillaries have a feedback effect or a direct potentiation for hypertrophy signaling. But at this stage, the data is actually not looking very promising. And
Mm.
then the third aspect is, well, any form of cardio will actually blunt your gains in muscle mass. And I think that's a nuanced answer. That is, when you perform your resistance training session, you're really ramping up muscle protein synthesis straight afterwards, for especially for the next 8, 10, 12 hours. If you were to perform your resistance training and then went and did an hour of cardio and you're still in a fasted state, you don't have any energy, on first principles, that doesn't make a lot of sense in that you want to stop your weight training session, refeed with energy, including protein, and start that anabolic process rather than creating a low energy environment. But if you were to do the cardio first, then that's probably not a great idea because you're going to perform your weights training under fatigue and therefore get less out of that session.
Mm.
But when you look across the studies and meta-analyses called the concurrent training effect, where both are performed in the same week, there doesn't really seem to be an interference unless you're doing a lot of muscle damaging exercise like running.
Mm.
So you just put your weight training at a separate time to your resistance training, and then you'll get the work capacity benefits that I believe will transfer to the weight training, but maybe just not do them in the same session. unless you're time crunched. And in that case, you're probably not looking at maximizing, you're just looking at getting the best of everything.
Makes sense. And even the question presumes that we're looking at everything through the lens of only muscle
Maximize.
hypertrophy, when in fact,
Yep.
I mean, more and more we're looking at cardiovascular health outcomes as well. Now, lifting weights, strength training is great for that, but adding the cardio in also really important. So I'm not so worried about min-maxing on that one. That was a good answer. Are we slower to recover from training as we get older?
There's two different ways this is viewed through. And the first is conceptually. Do you feel like you need more recovery? And the work on masters athletes have shown that the lower intensity zone 1 and 2 exercise, there is no difference in recovery between
Hmm.
younger and older cohorts. Where there is a difference is through resistance training and sprint training. So in other words, those neurologically demanding exercises using a lot of fast twitch muscle fibers. But also, Peter Rayburn's work has shown that there certainly is a conceptual difference in that older individuals feel that they take longer to recover, but when they're actually tested in the lab, those differences aren't so profound. And there seems to be very little difference when you look at the muscular recovery between 1, 2, and 3 days between low intensity exercise, but there certainly is after that fast twitch engaging exercise. So there's two differences, physiological differences, which are absolutely real. And then there's the conceptual differences where older individuals feel like they need more recovery.
Hmm. Okay, that's fascinating. Is there any data on whether this is happening, if it is happening at a neurological level, at a cellular, mitochondrial, cell repair level, at a, yeah, or any of those? Because you already alluded to certainly psychological.
Yeah, so I've spoken to Peter Rayburn about this, who's really led the charge on this. He feels that it is a neurological difference, not so much a muscular difference. The difficulty in answering this with any degree of certainty, again, using Rayburn's framework, is there's three types of people who are being studied when they're in their 70s and 80s. And there is those people who've never stopped training. There are those people who trained, stopped, and then came back to training in their later years. And there's those people who never trained and then took it up in their 70s.
Hmm.
And those three different groups of people will most likely have different responses to training, recovery timelines, and potentially different explanations for the differences in recovery. But by and large, Rayburn thinks that it's a neurological difference because he sees resistance training, speed and power training having a slower recovery timeline than, say, zone 2 or steady state training.
And is there any data on whether some of this stuff, I mean, we're thinking about what's the bottleneck, and it's the slowest tissue to probably recover due to the least blood flow, which is joint connective tissue. Is there
Mhm.
any thought that that might be the constraint here?
Rayburn thinks that is absolutely the case and thinks there's a really strong argument for doing more mobility exercises and stretching so that the range of motion is not a bottleneck during exercise. We just don't have enough answer on that.
Mm.
It conceivably makes a lot of sense, but until some older individuals are donating parts of their tendon and their ligaments and comparing it to 20-year-olds, we're never really going to know the answer.
To my coach listeners, I have a little something of value for you. A $1,500 value seminar for just $19. But let me explain the context first. Endorsing people I know and trust is everything. My friend, Dr. Sean Pastuch, is the founder of Active Life. Sean and I have presented at fitness conferences together, and we share a philosophy on helping coaches serve their clients better and want caring professionals to stay in a fulfilling career they love. Sean and Active Life have something of value for you. If you're a fitness coach who works with clients who have pain and movement limitations, and isn't that almost every client, and you feel like you're guessing at solutions instead of following a system, Active Life's professional biomechanics assessment workshop will be of value to you. It's a 2-day live online workshop where you'll learn the foundational principles behind assessment, load management, and how to actually help clients move and feel better. This used to be a $1,500 seminar that people would fly in to attend. Right now, it's just $19. And for listeners of the show, the CEU upgrade worth $100 is completely free. Just use the code COATS at checkout. Go to the link in the description to grab your spot. Again, use the code COATS at checkout.
Tony, I feel bad for you. You're probably never going to make it on these massive podcasts because your answers aren't absolute enough. They're qualified and hedged and honest about the data. So sorry, my friend, but this is exactly what I look for. So I love it. I hope everybody listening appreciates this and goes and follows you. We'll shout that out in a moment. Grip strength and aging. This one's a fun one because I think everybody listening kind of understands what's really going on here, but I think this one gets misrepresented. So can you explain the relationship?
There have been a number of studies, especially the PURE study, the largest of them, that has shown that grip strength measured with a hand dynamometer is strongly associated with longevity. You could also argue that there have been a number of meta-analyses that far exceed the PURE study that look at measurements and predictors of cardiovascular fitness via VO2 max and show huge reductions in all-cause mortality risk and longevity as well. When you pair these two findings together, grip strength and VO2 max, that hits the headlines that we want to measure and improve our VO2 max, and we want to improve our grip strength, which means every day I go into my gym, I see people doing dead hangs for their grip as a surrogate marker of their grip. But what every coach will know is it's not the proxy, it's not the test itself of grip strength or of VO2 max, is that you spent time lifting weights, which improved your grip strength, and it spent time, lots of time, developing your aerobic engine because it takes a long time to actually do that. It's not the test, it's the hours of work that you do into those two streams of activity. Because although there's overlap and similarity, what you're doing improving your heart via cardiovascular training is somewhat different to what you're doing when you're lifting weights. And again, it's important that there are overlaps, but they are quite metabolically different. And we want to be doing both of them.
And it stands to reason that people with more muscle and who are stronger are going to have better grip strength anyway. And I think there's another side to this that I've always recognized is if you look at the pool of people that we're pulling this research from, what's true of people who have various forms of metabolic health issues progressively worsening as they get older, which they're more common as we get older, right? Those people generally aren't as healthy. They probably don't have as much muscle mass, and they probably see their grip strength go down. Their VO2 max isn't great. And some of it, sure, lifting weights and doing a lot of things for your cardiovascular health, definitely going to contribute to longevity. We know that. But there's a lot of people who have no control over that stuff. And those things are going to interfere with being able to train those qualities, or they're going to erode them directly.
That's right. And Inigo San Milan, who's in Boulder, has done some really interesting work where he's compared sedentary and really metabolically deranged individuals with active individuals versus elite athletes. And he's looking at a surrogate marker, which is where the lactate levels hit 2 millimolars at what power on the bike. And essentially, the untrained metabolically deranged would just put their leg over the testing bike and their lactate's already at 2. Whereas great cyclists, they're already pushing out 300 watts before that actually happens. And these are ways of saying your aerobic fitness is an incredible predictor or a proxy for your metabolic health. And the higher you can raise your fitness at low intensity and the ceiling with your VO2 max, the better your reduction in all-cause mortality and metabolic health. But you've got to do the work. To get 300 watts at 2 millimoles of lactate, that involves hours of exercise. You might not need to get it that high, but that speaks to the point that none of this stuff happens by accident. You can't take a pill, you can't take an injection, you've got to do the work.
All right, I got one more fun one because this one gets really goofy when it comes to personal trainers. I like to argue about stabilizer muscles online, and I found you've had one of the most thoughtful ways of talking about this. So let's start with what are stabilizers in the context of a specific exercise?
There's a lot of nuance in answering this because some folks, well, we hope most folks, will never need to deal with this question.
Hmm.
And it comes down to the fact that the naming of muscles as either stabilizers or prime movers is really unhelpful. And that's, I think, the first mistake. And they get confused. Muscles are muscles, but they can play a role to create a joint function, like a hip thrust or a bench press. But they could also play a role to stop an unwanted joint movement or to allow the prime mover to work. So we say that that muscle is acting in a stabilizing function to allow another muscle to produce force, to produce a movement. For most people, most of the time, that's going to be good enough. But it's good enough until it isn't. And examples of this are really clear. If you're bench pressing, the job of, say, your pecs and your deltoids is to produce a horizontal movement at the arm to lift the bar up. The job at that stage of your rotator cuff is to compress your humerus so it doesn't pop out of the joint. So its job is to hold it down in place. If there is a disconnect and the prime mover is creating a pull so much on the joint that the rotator cuff exceeds its ability to compress the humerus in place, that's where we start to see a disconnect between prime mover role of a muscle and the stabilizing role of a muscle. And because data has shown that we use stabilizing muscles when we're performing multi-joint exercises, the simplistic answer is, well, they're being trained at the same time, so you never need to train stabilizers. And
Mhm.
for most people, most of the time, that is correct. Again, until it isn't. And you do see an aberrant movement that down the road could cause, say, a tendon rub or a muscle rub, and you get development where you don't want it. Think huge upper traps where you don't want them. Or you get a biceps or supraspinatus rub at the shoulder because the humerus has been rolling around in the glenoid because the job of the stabilizer wasn't good enough relative to the prime mover. And in those instances, we know that the stabilizing function of a muscle is not trained adequately in compound movements. And therefore, for those individuals in those cases, require special exercises to bring up the strength of the rotator cuff in pushing, the serratus anterior and lower trap to position the scapula better, deep hip for femoral movement, or the deep core for spine movement. And then once the whole level of that muscle strength as a stabilizer increases, then we tend to not worry too much about it again and we go back to life as normal.
That actually makes a profound amount of sense when you start thinking about it. If the stimulus is not the magnitude of the tension on a stabilizer muscle in the context of a very specific exercise, like you said, does not take it to near failure, it may not be enough of a stimulus to make it bigger or stronger. So it's fallacy to think that just because it's a stabilizer in a major compound exercise, that is enough stimulus to make it strong enough. Fair?
Fair. And it's always on a needs basis, Andrew. If you're watching somebody lift and the form looks good and under load and close to failure, you're not seeing aberrant joint function, you don't need to intervene. But if during bench pressing or rowing or pressing, whatever the movement, and you can see a joint movement that shouldn't be there outside of individual differences, everyone accomplishes tasks differently, but I think everyone knows what I mean. The humerus popping up and forward in pressing, the scapula going up into tilt when you're pushing or pulling in like a chin up or a military press. In those instances, those muscles, once cued, and it's not a cueing issue, it's a strength issue, then they would require special exercises to bring that up to match the prime mover strength so that the scapula can upwardly rotate and not tilt, or the humerus can stay locked in the glenoid and not translate superiorly. It's a very simple, I see this error, I'm going to cue it. Cueing doesn't fix it. Then let's go after it with a special exercise.
And all we're really doing is we're taking it from being a stabilizer in the context of that very specific exercise to its own prime mover for an
Correct.
exercise designed to target it. And that's the distinction. It's not like
That's the distinction. Yeah.
not that there are muscles that are universally and only function as stabilizers in all contexts. And I think that is why we get this weird argument about what stabilizer muscles actually are, because you get some people say that, oh, there's no such thing as a stabilizer muscle. Technically true
Right.
as a broad sweeping statement about a specific muscle, but a lot of muscles will function as stabilizers depending on the nature of the specific exercise. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Tony, this is wonderful. Everybody can get you on Instagram at Tony Boutagy, Boutagy. I follow you. You're an easy person to find. Any other resources that you'd like to point people to or anything you're working on right now?
Well, I have a web page, which is again my name, tonyboutagy.com. And there I offer a number of different courses and resources for either coaches and trainers or those people who are really interested in their training and want to go a little bit deeper. We have courses, we've got research reviews. I've got a number of papers in the pipelines at the moment, and when they get published, we'll be putting them out there on our social media and web page as well.
Wonderful. I appreciate it. And you've been a previous guest. It wasn't too long ago. I really do need to memorize what number those episodes are. But guys, if you scroll down, well, you'll have the byproduct of also seeing all the other great guests I've had, a lot of amazing evidence-based authorities like Dr. Eric Helms, Dr. Lauren Colenso Semple. People are doing amazing work. So, Tony, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today. I appreciate it.
Anytime, Andrew. Thank you.